Often, when introducing speakers, a moderator like me will say, Mrs. So-and-so, or Professor so-and-so, who needs no introduction. That's what we often say. And then we go into a long discussion about the introduction of the person. Well, I would suggest that they need introduction, so I'm going to introduce them tonight. Johannes Fabian, our main speaker tonight, was a professor of cultural anthropology at the University of Amsterdam. He has taught at Northwestern University, at Wesleyan in the United States, as well as the National University in Zaire. Fabian has been a fellow at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Berlin at the Getty Center for the History of Art and the Humanities, Santa Monica, and visiting Theodore Hirst, Professor of Anthropology at the New School for Social Research, New York. He was also a visiting fellow at Stanford. He has written numerous books and articles, arguably the most famous being the 1983 publication Time and the Other, How Anthropology Makes Its Object. Other publications include books such as History from Below, Power and Performance, Language and Colonial Power, and a collection of critical essays, Time and the Work of Anthropology. His two publications, Remembering the Present, Painting and Popular History in Zaire, and Moments of Freedom, Anthropology and Popular Culture, are especially germane for our discussion tonight, where he discusses popular culture and its importance as an object for interest, for anthropological interest.
Thank you, Wayne, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Paul, for inviting me. We were told to keep our thoughts short, so you will be hearing one of the shorter keynote speeches in history. My topic is, what is African popular art doing in a museum? Actually, what I mean is, what the hell is African popular art doing in a museum? You know, the purpose, as has been said already, the purpose of our gathering is to mark the publication of this book, taking stock of the Africa collections of this house, and among them the holdings in popular art. In their announcements, the conveners asked, I quote them, what is the meaning, betekenis, of these popular arts, and for whom is that meaning intended? What should and could be the role of museums in collecting and doing research on such meaning? But I now offer some suggestions on how to respond to these questions. My example will be, as you have been told already, a part of the museum's collection, popular art from Katanga in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and especially the by now famous history of Zaire, as the country was then called, by Chibumba Kanda Matulu, but in my view also an equally important sample, also owned by the museum, Paul should have mentioned that, a representative sample of genre painting from a kind of popular art form from which Chibumba emerged in the 1970s. I'm going to approach my task from two angles. One of them is suggested by the makers and users of these objects before they reach the museum. The other one, the other angle, posits itself as a kind of problem after these objects made it inside the museum. I can also ask, or put this into questions and ask, can the objects, once they are exhibited and stored in a museum, continue to do or mean what they did or meant before? And if so, how? I'll address this under the heading, Popular Art as a Reminder. The second question would be, can museum collections of such objects serve the production of anthropological knowledge, and if so, how? That will be discussed by offering some thoughts on popular art as evidence. First, popular art as a reminder. Popular painters and their clients, their customers, in Katanga had a thoroughly pragmatic view of the objects they created and bought. People could talk about what painting signified and showed, but most important to them was what the paintings did or caused. In fact, in the common language of the region, a variety of Swahili, the encompassing general terms used for this kind of painting were causative forms derived from the Swahili verb to remember, kukumbuka. So kukumbusha would be the causative form, make you remember. And the general term for this kind of painting was ukumbusho, an abstract noun, whatever it takes you to remember. There were some other functions and purposes noted, and they were talked about. There was also kufurahisha, that means to bring joy, and then there was also to kutengeneza, which means help to decorate the homes. Both of these were important points. But ukumbusho was the important one. And incidentally, when I visited Tanzania a few years ago, I saw this causative term, makumbusho, stuff that causes to remember, inscribed on a building. And that building was a museum. Of course, to say that paintings make you remember, one could refer to them as memory objects, leads to another question, remember what? Again, painters and clients had a general and encompassing answer to that question. Paintings, they would say, remind us of a history we share, of our ancestral and colonial past, as well as of the upheavals surrounding independence and the events that followed. Against all appearances, however, Katanga genre painting should not be filed away as an instance of a culture of remembering, Erinnerungskultur. That is a conception of memory as culture, of memories as traumatic as they may have been, as violent, of violence and oppression, which by the very fact of being conceptualized as culture are being domesticated. Castrated through conventionalized images of the past. Erinnerungskultur is Erinnerung that doesn't hurt anymore. And if you think that this would have certain consequences about how to think about the thing that Erinnerungskultur was invented for, I invite you to do this. It was the Holocaust. Now, among the reasons why such an interpretation would be wrong, I will briefly mention three, unless Modest tells me two are enough. First, the canon or repertoire of genre painting in Katanga included pictures, among them the most popular ones, that show not the past, but what we then called things present. That is why I titled a study of Chibumba's work, Remembering the Present. Neither the painters nor the users had any antiquarian interests when they made or displayed these pictures. And this is the moment where we want to take a look at one picture only. This is Chibumba's realization of one of the genres, one of the most popular genres, called Colonie Belge, and has a few other names. Very briefly, ostensibly, these are memories of the Belgian colonial past. But every user then, even some dim-witted anthropologists, figured out that while the reference was the past, the connotation was the present, namely Mobutu's oppressive regime. This was conjecture then, but now, after many, many years, and having had the opportunity to listen to these painters, I have the documentation. I have several painters stating exactly that. It's about the present. Thank you. Wilhelmine, wherever you are. So, to respect and to represent or present this kind of presentism, memories about the present, may be the most urgent and difficult challenge to meet when popular art ends up in collections in a museum. I promised you 3 reasons why it would be wrong to think of this kind of painting as Erinnerungskultur. Number 2 is less obvious, but equally important, if one wants to avoid essentializing the kind of painting that we are using as an example here. And that reason emerged from numerous conversations with painters that are now available publicly available on an archive on the internet. At the end of the talk, you will see, will be given the address of this archive. In Katanga Swahili, the verbs signifying remembering, kukumbuka, and thinking, kuwaza, are often used interchangeably. That happens in other languages too, but here it is very, very clear. Almost all the artists we questioned, or I questioned, insisted that apart from talent and imagination, it takes thinking, kuwaza, and ideas to paint a picture, or to use an expression they often use, to do a thing, kufanya kintu. To do justice to their creators' intentions, products of popular art of the kind we are discussing here should therefore be recognized as think pieces. They may have aesthetic qualities and certainly are valuable tokens of material culture. And these properties they share with many other objects in the museum. But above all, they are intellectual objects, calling for the same kind of direct, sustained, and critical attention we pay to other products of thought, including the articles we are writing, the books we are writing. So what the hell is African popular art doing in a museum, I ask again? It makes it possible and compels us to confront Africa intellectually at eye level. When I speak of confrontation here, I don't mean this in the weak sense of facing or looking at whatever we want to understand. Confronting Africa through its popular art calls for acknowledging its disturbing presence and taking a position in the struggle for individual and collective survival that, at least in my view, constitutes the ideas and practices that we found useful to call popular art. Popular art is about survival. The third reason, finally, when asked what made a genre painting distinctive compared to other kinds of art, both the makers and the users of these genre pictures would insist, mostly without hesitating, that they must, quote unquote, come with a story. Come with a story. To translate this into the language of art history and call genre painting narrative, however, would be facile as well as wrong. Some genres represent actions and events, scenes of hunting and war, others don't. Landscapes and portraits, for instance, or the ubiquitous picture of the mermaid. What counts, and this brings us back to what we said about remembering and thinking, is that these paintings are discursive objects, not narrative. They're discursive objects, that is, they are conceived as such by the artist, and they fulfill their purpose when people buy and display them as conversation pieces, literally. That is, as objects that make them tell and share stories. Popular art, that's so much about popular art as reminder, popular art as evidence now. Trying to answer the question, how does that stuff serve the production of anthropological knowledge? We all know that museums are like icebergs. Only the tip shows. Even for recent acquisitions like African popular painting, in this case, it does not take long to disappear in magazines that are figuratively and most often literally below the surface, including in this institution. Museums, including ethnological museums, have therefore been treasuries. Not only as depositories of priceless objects, but also as institutions that back up the value of objects that have a price and circulate in a market. Now, fortunately, from my point of view, the kinds of objects we are talking about here, African popular painting, have on the whole not become part of the often unsavory practices that go with a market, including robbery, forgery, and the exploits of passionate collectors and conniving curators. I'm proud of that formulation. That characterize, all of which characterize Africans as well as the African as well as any other art market. Robbery, forgery, and the exploits of passionate collectors and conniving curators. Which allows us to get back to the original conceptualization, to one original conceptualization of ethnographic objects in museums as, the German word, Belegstücke. For the Dutch audience, I don't have to translate it. In English, it would be something like vouchers, but you will get a translation later on. That was a word that Adolf Bastian, one of our ancestors, as an anthropologist as well as a museum, as a museum man, used 100 years ago. Now, as Belegstücke, they not only represent other cultures, but they are proof of, or at least support for, theories we resort to when we produce anthropological knowledge. Seen from this angle, ethnological museums could serve, could be said to serve, if I may introduce one other German term, as Asservatenkammern. Asservatenkammern are the kinds of locked rooms where the police and the juridical authority keep evidence that they want to introduce into court. What I like in rethinking objects stored in museums as asservate is that it encourages us to go beyond the notion of evidence as an epistemological concept or a methodological concept, and that it and to admit that the things we store and exhibit are, if I may use a last figure of speech, bones of contention. Evidence, it makes sense of evidence only, to speak of evidence in this figure of speech only, if there is a case to prove. If whatever we debate is a matter of contention. Our colleagues inside museums know the literal truth of contention when they are confronted, as they are, perhaps daily, with claims to cultural property from the countries where their collections were made. But all students of African popular art should be aware that African art, popular or not, should be aware that our inquiries and the knowledge we present have political implications and repercussions, no matter whether we acknowledge this or not. Wayne, how am I doing? Where's Wayne? Am I doing all right? Okay, fine. Okay, enough of icebergs, treasuries, Asservatenkammern. They are useful metaphors, and as such they may help to bring popular art as evidence into focus. But they must not be allowed to obscure the nature of anthropological inquiry. The kind of ethnographic knowledge we labor to produce is not metaphorical, it's metonymic. Let me explain. When we seek to establish the meaning of popular paintings, remember the question in the beginning, what do they mean? We do not just act as analysts and interpreters of objects or as translators of texts. To build the empirical foundations of our inquiries through field research, as we call it, we must be in touch with the people we study, and to varying degrees we must share place and time with them, and are therefore caught up in events in which we participate. So this actual connection, that's what I mean by metonymy, does not stop, that's an important point, when field research is completed, results are published, and objects are deposited in the museum. Realizing that is that its creation and the subsequent steps of inquiry are part of the process, part of one process, makes yet another sense in which we can understand that popular art, what popular art does in a museum. Popular art remains part of a creative process even when it is deposited in a museum. The time economy of working with collections of objects, it requires a lot of patience, a long breath, and a lot of time, may at one time have made museum anthropology marginal to the discipline. In the current situation at our universities, as I see it from the outside, where rewards are often survival depend on hit-and-run research and ad hoc publication, museums begin to look like last resorts against rampant academic neoliberalism. But I'm getting carried away, and I don't want to spend too much time lamenting the state of academia. Let me return to evidence and conclude this talk on a more encouraging note. I'm telling you nothing new when I note that computers and the internet have significantly changed the museum's capacity to make, without having to unlock their magazines, their holdings, accessible to researchers and often to the public. at large. And the same goes for collection outside of museums. Digital images of an incredible number of Katanga genre paintings. You know, most of you never heard of that. Most of you don't even know where Katanga is. But there is a website. You will get the address later. Of these paintings collected by the missionary historian, the Belgian missionary historian Leo Verbeek, and by my colleague and great friend Bogomil Jewsiewicki. There are about 15,000 of them can be viewed on the web, on the internet at any time. And a summary of the work of Leo Verbeek has recently appeared as a book. And therein it is mentioned that neither the website nor the book has even touched 60,000 pages of research notes. And for me, mind-boggling, 4,000 taped conversations with painters. They are all stored in Lubumbashi, which goes to show that even studies in the comparatively small field of Katanga, of popular African art, where attention is given only to one kind of painting, namely genre painting, produced in one region, Katanga, during a limited space of time, the 70s, face an absurd discrepancy between available evidence and feasible scholarly inquiry. Fortunately, I think, intellectual paralysis need not be the inescapable outcome. The situation I just described, though it may be novel in scale, is nothing new and is no different in kind from the one that all productive ethnographers inside and outside museums have to deal with when it comes, as we say, to using the objects, field notes, sound recordings, photographs, films, or video material, and written or printed documents we have brought back from the field. We are outnumbered by that, and it doesn't make a difference if you're outnumbered by 500 recordings or 100 recordings or by 4,000. Thus, the moment is to remember. This is now the moment to remember what I said or we said before. You don't have to worry about evidence unless, like in a court, you have a case to argue. No matter how gigantic data banks may become, short of relegating inquiry to the same machines that feed the data banks, our abilities of doing justice to the data and producing knowledge will always be constrained by our personal capacity to represent and communicate in teaching and writing knowledge that, on the other hand, our audiences and readers can or want to absorb. I discovered some time ago that when ethnographic documents are consigned to a virtual archive, it is not the quantity that makes a difference, but it is a new kind of presence such documents take on when they are put onto the internet, in ways that were not possible, excluded by the rules and possibilities of traditional print publishing. Writers as well as readers now, readers of ethnographies, can now show or inspect the textual evidence on which these books are placed. I have tried such an experiment, made such an experiment, and it was published some years ago as under the title Ethnography as Commentary Writing from the Virtual Archive. In that book, I transcribed one single text. Now I have a project, which may remain a project. My ambition is to do something similar on a corpus of text, in this case about 10 conversations with Katanga genre painters. Address comes. Even if this should remain a project, the archive where the texts are now are there to stay, as much as anything is there to stay. And they are to stay more and more, not as data for scientific investigations, but as documents and a contribution of and a contribution to remembered history. That archive is publicly accessible to other researchers, and as time goes on, perhaps, actually I hope, more importantly, to the people concerned. It is also my hope that similar archives will become a way in which the mission of museums as depositories of objects and the purpose of ethnography can converge. But museums do what ethnographers do, can converge. One last time. What is African popular art doing in a museum? It waits for us to do what it is intended to do. As a reminder, it makes us remember Africa, not past, but as present. As evidence, it allows and encourages us to, as it were, go to court with causes we want to argue in public and in scholarly debates, and learning to do our work in real as well as in virtual space, in my view, opens exciting prospects for anthropology. Thank you.